All right, Derek, it's time for the games of the week presented by BetMGM. We have a couple doozies on tap in week 11. Let's start with the Chiefs at the Bills. Bills are -2 in this game. I don't think I really need to sell this. It's a Chiefs team that's undefeated against a two-loss Bills team in a game that is featuring two of the best players in the NFL and has very real implications for what the one seed is potentially going to look like in the AFC. I don't need to give you the hard sell on this one.
Yeah, almost regardless of how good the rest of the teams are, the two quarterbacks alone, like, yeah, I'm going to sit down and that's what I want to watch on Sunday every time.
We've talked about the Chiefs a little bit recently, just the ways that they're doing some of this and the fact that this feels like such a complete Chiefs team, and it's just almost more complete than it's ever been. Obviously, the defense was good last year, but the complementary ways that they're winning have been really obvious. It's been a while since we had a considered conversation about the Bills. They played some shitty teams recently, and they've been kind of in and out of these discussions. I want to just take your temperature as we're 10 weeks into the season about how you see this version of the Bills.
There is a significant portion of my mind, body, and soul that believes this is actually the best team in football. Like, I really think
Really?
I've arrived there. Yeah, I really think that I've arrived there. And they're favored in
Make
this game.
make your case for this.
Okay, so
You're gonna piss off some people doing this,
I
by the
am.
way,
I know.
including the fan base on the other side in this game.
So I will start off by selling the offense, and I think it's actually great contrasted by this Chiefs offense. I think the Bills offense is everything the Chiefs want to be, where you can get
Ooh,
under
I
center,
like
you can
that.
run the ball, you can like be mean and do all this pulling stuff. You can get into all your shotgun stuff. You can do some RPOs, you can do some simple passing games, but they can actually get explosives. The Kansas City Chiefs cannot get explosives, but the Bills can actually do it. And I think they've done a really interesting job with some of that stuff. And then defensively, I think the Bills defense has just been really good. I think we came into the season being like, all right, what is their ceiling? Like they're missing a couple of
Yeah.
pieces now. Obviously, Matt Milano has not played for a majority of the season. I think you wanted to see if they could kind of hold up in the back end with um, not a lot of marquee names back there outside of Teron Johnson. And so I think, people had some question marks there, but I think they've been one of the best and most put together defenses throughout the entire season. Like, regardless of who is out there for them, whether it's Dorian Williams stepping up when he has to, he's been really good. Greg Rousseau has taken a step. Ed Oliver is still really good. Daquan Jones obviously missed a lot of last year, but he's been really good now that he's healthy. Like, it seems to me both sides of the ball are just playing at a really, really high level. And then I think part of the reason people have struggled to kind of put the Bills back into this territory is that Texans game was just so bad. Like, I think it's so hard to forget how bad Josh Allen looked in that game, and how rough a lot of that was. And so I think it's just kind of like it's taking us a little bit too much time to throw out one like week 5 game, but almost all of the other games that they've played, they've been incredible.
I understand your point about being a slightly different gear than the Chiefs just because they have that explosive play potential. Just throwing it out there. The Bills are 8th in explosive play rate this season. The Chiefs are 28th. So that comparison where you have the same sort of consistency, success rate, down to down efficiency with these teams, but the Bills just have another gear. I'm willing to accept that. How right now can you make a good faith argument that the Bills are a better team than the Lions?
Okay, so here's how I would frame it. I think it's when I get to January, I would much rather have the team with Josh Allen. I think there is a case that for the sake of winning regular season games, the Lions maybe are a little bit better put together. I think even though the Bills' offensive line and run game is obviously good, Detroit's is probably the best in the league right now. Ben Johnson is obviously doing an incredible job, both run and pass. Jared Goff has mostly played good ball. And then the Lions defense, like, I just praised the Bills defense and how well they're playing. Lions defense is also playing at a really high level. I just think when we really get down to it at the end of the season, I would just much rather have Josh Allen. Like, if I'm going to put these two teams in basically the same bucket and then I'm going to have to split the difference one way or another, yeah, I'm going to take Josh Allen over Jared Goff.
I can understand that. And I do think that if we're projecting this forward and we're thinking about which team has more avenues when we get to the most important games of the year, you could make a serious argument the Bills
That's
will
what it
have
is.
that because
Yeah.
Josh Allen will have those break in case of emergency sort of plays. The problem with framing it that way, though, if you're going to say, all right, in January, I think that this team is going to have a gear that makes them a unique sort of challenge compared to a team like the Lions. You're going to be able to say the same thing about the Chiefs. Even if the Chiefs don't feel complete right now, you're going to have a version of Patrick Mahomes and a potential version of this Chiefs team like the one we saw in last year's playoffs, where I think that they probably either catch up to what you're saying with the Bills or surpass that.
That scares me more than anything. It's really not the Lions. It's not the Ravens. Like, I don't think the Ravens are going to figure it out defensively. I think, like
It's
I
so
said, when it
sad, by
comes,
the way.
it is very sad. I wish that I could like put them in this tier, but the defense is just it's not there, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. Um, but no, there is a little bit of I get scared, knowing what the Chiefs will probably look like in January. Like they're 28th, like you mentioned, in explosive plays now. It'll probably be better by the time this football starts to matter. I just think that there
DeAndre
are
Hopkins is there now. They've
right,
played most of the
exactly.
season without Rashee Rice or that secondary pass catching option to Kelsey. Those couple misses we've seen to Xavier Worthy. Like there is a dormant version of the Chiefs that I think is closer to the Bills team that you're talking about right now.
There definitely is, but there are, I think, at most two quarterbacks who can go punch for punch with Patrick Mahomes. The Bills have one of them. And so that's kind of where I'm like, okay, at least, trying to go out on a limb here and saying the Bills right now might be my favorite team in football.
You talk about the offense having that gear and the explosive plays that we've seen from them. Let's start with that side of the ball and how it applies to this game specifically. What do you want to see and what are you looking for with this Bills offense against this Chiefs defense?
I mean, I know it's boring, but like I just want to see them run the ball, man. Like this Bills run offense is truly one of the most. It's not just that they're good; it's that they're incredibly diverse. Like they can
Yeah.
get under center. It's not just that they can go under center and they can do it from gun and they can have the quarterback. It's like they'll do some of like what the Niners do, where they bring the guy across and run outside zone where the tight end is going, and they use him as like a double team guy. They'll do that from under center. They run a lot of duo more than a lot of other teams. They also run weak zone as like a counter to their duo in the sense because it's a lot of the same formations, but obviously you're running it to the weak side of the formation instead of to the strength. They'll obviously add Josh Allen into the quarterback running game. They'll do some RPOs where they add that element to it. Like they just every single thing under the sun. They'll do. They even actually had in the Colts game, they ran like a little shuffle motion to trap the three tech right before the line of right before the snap. Like they just everything that you can think of in the run game, they'll do. And I just don't think that this Chiefs run defense right now, or their defense in general, is like going to be good enough to handle them and slow them down in that department.
What they did in the run game last week against the Colts, the transition they made at one point during that game, because they were running a lot of duo early in the game,
Mhm.
trying to get the ball downhill, and the edges for the Colts were kind of ruining the game. Latu made 3 or 4 plays against the run, and so I think over the course of the game, Joe Brady figured out, "I'm not doing this shit anymore. We're creating some angles. We're not gonna worry about trying to have 2 tight ends double team these guys. Let's just get up to the second level, run some of that gap scheme stuff that we have." The fact that they have such a varied bag that they can pull from, I think allows them to problem solve against whatever a defense is trying to do and whatever may not be working over the course of that game. I will say though, the Chiefs' run defense has been exceptionally, like considerably better this year than it has been in years past. And I think that's the biggest difference when we're thinking about what the Bills did to this Chiefs defense in the wild card game last year, where they pretty much moved the ball at will consistently for a good majority of the game. This Chiefs run defense is a very different thing. If you combine the regular season and the playoffs last year, the Chiefs were 31st in run defense success rate because in large part because of what the Bills did to them in that game. If you just the regular season, they were 22nd. So even if you want to go with that, they're fourth this year. So I do think that this version of the Chiefs is maybe a little bit more of a test for the Bills offense and for the Bills ground game than versions of this team that we've seen in the past.
It definitely is. Like it won't be as where they're just running through them the way that they have in previous matchups. But there's something about the versatility that Buffalo has that I think that's going to probably win out in this one, or at least that would be where I push my money to.
Couple things I wanted to talk about specifically with the Bills offense and what they look like right now. Watching them, a couple things, different things stick out. One, it's just more of a ball control passing game than it's ever been with this team, and I do think that that's given them an even greater sense of like consistency and something to rely on. Josh Allen this year has thrown 26% of his attempts behind the line of scrimmage. That's the 10th highest rate in the NFL. Right, he is averaging 7.7 air yards per attempt, which is like in the middle of the pack and a full yard less than he was averaging last season. So you've seen, and there's still obviously the shots down the field. He's still going to be Josh Allen. He's still going to be aggressive, but the kind of high lowing that we're seeing with all the underneath stuff plus those shots, I think is more even and more spread out in terms of the ratio than it's ever been with this team. And the other thing that really jumped out to me when I was watching the Colts, and this really sticks out against the Colts specifically because they play such little man coverage. I love watching what this Chiefs team is able to do in creating space against zone defenses this year when they get James Cook out on a route. You look at it like it's so beautiful. The whole shot he hits a Matt Collins down the left sideline.
Oh,
in that
man.
game against the Colts.
Mhm.
That happens because James Cook releases late. The flat defender steps up and it distributes exactly how it should with the timing that it should. And Matt Collins runs a little out and up on that play. And it only works because the out causes the corner on that side to bail out. It's just good details. And the spacing of it when you watch it unfold is perfect. And so I was curious. I was like, okay, what have this Bills team, when they get 5 out on the route, how good have they been this year? The only team that has more EPA total on plays where they have 5 receivers out in routes is the Ravens. And the Ravens and the Chiefs are in their own zip code on those plays this season. Lamar has 61 total EPA, which is crazy considering he has 70 fewer dropbacks than Josh Allen on those plays. Allen's at 49. No one else is above 27. So these guys are in their own world when it comes to those sorts of plays. And I think why that matters against this Chiefs team is this Chiefs team plays a ton of zone. They play a ton of soft zone. So the way that the Bills are playing offensively right now, how they're spacing things out, how they're attacking teams, I actually think is very applicable to what this Chiefs team wants to do and who this Chiefs team is.
Yeah, Josh Allen, like, I think too why it actually really, really works is that them getting 5 out in the route kind of allows the explosive plays to be on Josh Allen or to just be those hole shots. Like, when you're a lot of other teams, think about the Lions, they'll get 3 out in a route on a play action thing, and they're just throwing like dig routes over the middle of the field. With Josh Allen, you want to spread the field out as much as possible, force teams to be in like that cover 2 stuff, so you can throw those whole shots to Matt Collins.
Any
Or
window is available to him.
right, yes, that's the ticket, is that any window is available. And so if again, you get 5 out in the route and you stretch everything out, then yeah, he's going to be able to find the windows. And also, it's just if you get 5 out in the route and he gets pressured a little bit, he's just going to take off and do something crazy. And that is a much better answer than putting 7 or 8 in protection and just kind of like forcing him to be hunkered in the pocket.
The other thing I want to point out, just last thing on this side of the ball that I think is worth keeping in mind as we consider this Chiefs defense moving forward. Chiefs defense has been really good, been one of the best units in the league. We know that Spags is going to dial up crazy shit all the time. They're a problem to deal with. When the Chiefs have brought 4 this year, they have been an objectively bad pass rush. And last week is an interesting test because the Broncos pass protection, which we'll talk about a little bit later on the show, is exceptional. Like they're one of the best pass protecting units in the league. So you really saw it show up. But it wasn't just last week against the Broncos. This season, when they bring 4 pass rushers on non-blitzes, the Chiefs have the 4th lowest pressure rate in the NFL. The only teams below them are the Patriots, who traded Matt Judon and haven't had Christian Barmore for the entire season, the Panthers, who have truly one of the worst pass rushes I've ever seen down to down and traded Brian Burns before the season, and the Falcons, who have had an anemic pass rush since I started following
Oh god,
football.
at least they're above the Falcons though. I mean, that would be
It's
like
not by
real red
far.
alert territory.
It's not by that much. So just something to keep in mind in situation, and they're only blitzing 35% of the time. So that's 65% of plays where you have a team that is struggling to create pressure with 4, even with Chris Jones. You would hope when Amenahu gets back, which is not going to be this week, but is going to be hopefully next week, he started to practice again, that gets a little bit better. But when you think about potential holes you can poke in a defense when the games really start to get important, you start playing against really good offenses. That's just something to keep in the back of your mind when you're considering what this Chiefs team is down to down.
That's the biggest problem. I think what you see, and we've said this forever about pretty much any of the elite quarterbacks, is that you just have to find a way to get home with 4. Whether it can be an unconventional 4, that's fine, but you just have to find a way to get home with 4 so you have enough bodies in coverage, or even if the quarterback takes off, whether it's Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, whoever it is, to make sure that you can contain them. Chiefs just don't feel like they have that to the same level that they wanted. Like, for as much as I like George Karlaftis as a player, he's just not an ace type of pass rusher. And then Chris Jones, I don't think is quite playing to his level. And then outside of that, I think other than Amenu, who we probably knew they weren't going to have a lot of, high level
Yeah,
pass
I
rushers
like
on this,
Mike Dana. Like I like
but
some
they're
of
role
the
players, and that's
exactly.
fine.
I like some of the role players that they have, but without a Menahu to be that 3rd pass rusher in defined passing situations, I just think that they've had a hard time, especially when you're getting 4 hands on Chris Jones. No one else is consistently winning. And it hasn't mattered that much right now. But when you start playing against the Ravens in the playoffs, when you start playing, not the Ravens in week 1, you start playing against the Ravens in January, when you start playing against this version of the Bills, it is something to keep in mind. Let's get to the other side of the ball. Number one thing you're looking for with this Chiefs offense against this version of the Bills defense.
I think what's actually fascinating to me about this matchup is the Bills have been in more dime than they've ever been in, really, especially in pure pass situations. So on 3rd and 4th downs of 6 or more yards, they have the 4th most snaps of dime. And for them, they bring safety Cam Lewis onto the field typically. They have 60 snaps of that. Like I said, it is the 4th most in the league. However, the Chiefs have built their entire offense to get into 3rd and 3 where it's not clear pass and you don't get to be in dime. So I think it's a very interesting, like, which of these two forces wins out. Like, can the Bills get them into enough of these pure pass situations, which obviously the Chiefs have been incredible at anyway, but this is where the Bills want to live and how they want to put their defense together. Or can the Chiefs run the ball well enough that they are actually able to just stay in these 3rd and 2s that they keep converting and keep some of the players that the Bills maybe don't want on the field on some of these downs?
They've done a lot of that because they've been so good at running the ball consistently on early downs. And I think that part of the matchup is where my attention goes first. The Bills' run defense, they're, I think, 4th in run defense success rate this year. Like, they have been able to slow teams down when it comes to getting consistent yardage. Where the Bills' run defense has been a little leaky is they've allowed explosive runs. They essentially allow 120-yard run per game. They've allowed 10 of them so far this year. Well, guess what? The Chiefs aren't really capable of doing that. One area where the Bills are acceptable to allowing explosive plays is one area where the Chiefs have not been able to create them. So I think that's absolutely worth taking into account here when you think about how these two teams match up right now.
Yeah, and I just don't know who the player is on the Chiefs that is supposed to get you your explosives. Like, I
It's
actually
not
think
Kareem Hunt.
No, like Kareem Hunt is like running hard between the tackles and he gets them the tough yardage. You can see anytime he gets out in space, there's not another gear anymore. There used to be a gear there 5 years ago. It's gone. Carson Steele doesn't give that to him. I don't think they're getting Pacheco back for this game. Like, it is just, they just don't have the explosiveness in that territory. Like, honestly, if they get an explosive, it's going to be a McCole Hardman end around or something like that. Like, I don't think it's going to be from one of the backs. And that type of stuff I think is less predictable. So I actually think, even though this has been a weakness for the Bills, this just feels like a game you probably won't get punished for it, or at least you shouldn't.
And another area where I think this Bills team or this Chiefs team has been able to take advantage of opposing defenses that doesn't apply as much to the Bills. The Chiefs' numbers on 3rd down this year against man coverage
Just silly.
are truly preposterous. I was looking it up today just because against the Broncos, there were a couple 3rd downs where they're creating, like, Kelsey will run a little whip route. They're creating separation with Noah Gray. They do a very good job of designing separation into the play when they know teams are going to be playing man on 3rd and medium. Mahomes this season has seen man on about 45% of his 3rd down dropbacks. That's pretty much average. It's like right around what you'd expect for most teams. He has a 62% success rate on those plays. I'm pretty sure no one else is above like 52%.
I can't imagine they would be.
He's averaging 0.53 EPA per play. Just for context, Lamar this season, who is having a historically good efficiency year, is at 0.34. What Mahomes is doing on 3rd down, and the fact that it's on these 3rd downs, it's fucking demoralizing. That's what it is like to play against this team right now, is you'll get a 4-yard run on 1st down. You get a 3-yard run on 2nd down. It's 3rd and 3, and then they get the 3rd and 3. That's what it is like to play against this team. And that's a very dangerous way to live for most NFL teams. But when you have this guy under center and he's the one that is carrying those moments, it all feels a little bit more sustainable and it all feels a little bit more devastating for the teams that are having to play against him.
It's unbelievably frustrating. Like just the fact alone that they're so good at getting into 3rd and 3, where depending on field position could be run or pass. And with the Chiefs, they'll run or pass out of any different formation. And then you get into the spot where if they do pass, you expect to get pressure on 3rd downs, especially I think against this Chiefs offensive line, particularly their left tackle. It just doesn't matter. Like, Mahomes is going to find a way to scramble out. He's going to get that 4 on 3rd and 3. Or he's going to find Kelsey with some weird little flip, or it's going to be Noah Gray, who he also weirdly has a great connection with. Like, he's going to find a way to get the conversion. And I actually think, for as well as this Buffalo Bills team is coached, like, at a certain point, like, it just doesn't matter. Like, Mahomes is Mahomes. And no matter how good your coaching is, no matter how good your spacing is, he's just going to find those plays.
I was wondering how much of it is the pressure and the pass protection an issue for this team, really? Because last week against the Broncos, they were kind of on the run for a good chunk of that game. If you look at the numbers, they're incredible. We know this inherently. The left tackle is the problem area for the Chiefs, right? Like, for the most part, the rest of their offensive line, full of good players, is consistent. I was not ready for how stark those numbers were. So far this season, their offensive line has allowed pressure, has been the cause of pressure per PFF on 72% of Mahomes' dropbacks. The left tackle is responsible for about 35% of those. So that's the highest rate in the league for one position among any team, and the Chiefs have the 2nd lowest offensive line allowed pressure rate. That's the gap. We're talking that it's in its own stratosphere when it comes to one problem area for one team becoming the issue. And I wonder how that manifests in this game specifically, because Greg Rousseau, for the most part, spends a good chunk of his time
Mhm.
on the left side. But with Von Miller back now, there is a chance that he's going to be over on the right side a little bit more. And I think that matchup, Greg Rousseau, who's having a career year and truly is like one of the better defensive players in the league right now and how he's affecting games, what he does against whoever ends up playing left tackle for the Chiefs, that's the one matchup on that side of the ball that I'm circling, considering what these teams have been all year.
Whether Miller is back or not, they should get him matched up over there. Aaron Schatz of FTN actually tweeted today a list of basically quarterback knockdowns, which is sacks plus just the amount of times you hit
Mhm.
the quarterback. So it's not like the perfect measure of anything. It's kind of a weird mixture of two stats, but it's just how many times are you putting the quarterback on his ass? Greg Rousseau is fifth right now behind Zach Allen, Trey Hendrickson, TJ Watt, and Aiden Hutchinson, which insane. Aiden Hutchinson is there and hasn't played in a month. But Rousseau has 19 of them. Like he is just a guy who 3-4 times, like a handful of times a game, is just putting your quarterback on his ass. And I fully expect him to. I would at least say put hands on Patrick Mahomes. I don't know. It's not easy to bring him down, but I think he's going to have opportunities where he at least makes this difficult for Mahomes.
One of my favorite plays of that game last week is the play where Nick Bonito comes scot-free, has Mahomes in the grass, spins him around, and as Mahomes is spinning, he just chucks the ball out of bounds because he knows no one's going to be there. And
Mhm.
Bonito, as it happens, he turned around. He's like, "Wait, what?" And he like put
Yes,
his hands on his head because he's like, "What do you mean that ended in an incompletion? Are you serious?" And that is what I mean when it comes to how demoralizing it is to play against these guys. And Rousseau is somebody we talked a little bit about in our midweek show. He is leveled up in a huge way. And talking about all those hitting the quarterback, affecting the quarterback, that's not even considering the way he's played against the run this year. We were wondering what sort of impact the rise of those younger edge players, him, Epinesa, whoever, would have on where this Bills team could go at its current iteration. It was a necessary component for me, is him being like a consistently impactful player and staying healthy, which he's struggled to do over the last couple of years. And he has done that and more this year. He's been everything you could have hoped if you're a Bills fan. All right, let's get to the next one here. Ravens at Steelers. Ravens are -3 in this game. It's a monster game. The winner of this game is the leader in the AFC North, has in the driver's seat in the division. This Steelers offense and this Ravens defense, I think both are versions of themselves that we might not have anticipated coming into the year, right? The Steelers offense is a little bit better than we expected, more capable than we expected, more explosive than we expected. The Ravens defense is a disaster, right? I mean, it's such a problem. And it's even if you were down on what they might look like as their entire staff essentially left and they had to start over, you'd think, all right, maybe they'll be slightly below average. The fact that they have been as subject to these explosive plays as they have been, I don't think anybody could have imagined, even in the negative outcomes for this team. How do you think that what the Steelers are doing right now offensively and the way that they're able to push the ball, do you think that aligns enough with the Ravens' defensive weaknesses that this Steelers offense can continue to give Baltimore problems that they've had all year?
I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth. On one hand, what the Steelers have been doing with Russ is not sustainable. Like it's just on a
Oh,
drop
you
back.
say that as your famous last words.
I know, but on a drop back success rate basis, the Steelers have a 41.1% drop back success rate with Russell Wilson back there, which I think was since week 7. That's when he started. It was 41% exactly with Justin Fields. So the success rate is basically the same. The difference is that Russell Wilson is hitting some of these deep shots and hitting some of these, 50-50 balls. And obviously Pickens is really good at those and Mike Williams is really good at those. But the rate at which they've been hitting them in these past 3 games feels a little bit unsustainable. However, this is the secondary to hit some 50-50 balls on. And what's so frustrating about this Ravens secondary is that it's not that they can't play tight coverage. Like the problem is they will play tight coverage, and then when it comes time to get your head around to find the ball, they can't find it. They're clueless. Like they just cannot get their head around and find the ball. They
What do
can't
you think
contest the
that's
catch
about?
point. I don't know. Like I truthfully don't know. I think it's less of an issue with Marlon Humphrey. I think it's been more of an issue with Brandon Stevens in
Yeah.
particular. And part of that is
His
like,
play is the thing that's most surprising to me, right?
yeah,
Like Marcus Williams has been banged up a little bit over the last few years.
mhm,
He's getting a little bit older. The regression we've seen from Brandon Stevens is something that I just couldn't really see coming. He was playing really good ball for them last year, and he just has not played at that level. And I know cornerback play is inherently volatile, but his slide that he has seen has probably been the thing outside of the Roquan Smith stuff that we've talked about. One of the more surprising aspects of what this defense has felt like this year.
Yeah, and I really think just his inability to find the ball is it. Like he's not a bad coverage player. Like I said, in terms of just sticking onto the guy and really making sure you're trying to keep these windows tight, he actually does a decent job. It's just a matter of like when it comes down to finding it at the catch point, he's really struggling right now. And maybe that's just, he's naturally a safety. So maybe that's just the weakest part of his game. And now that the rest of the Ravens defense is a little bit more uncertain, that's just become more exposed. I'm not entirely sure what it is. But that to me is the biggest issue. And so, like I said, if all the Steelers want to do is throw these 50-50 balls and, hey, go find the ball in the air, it's kind of the matchup to do it.
One other aspect of the Steelers' offense they've been able to rely on with Russ and as the season's gone along, the run game has been better. You'd think it wouldn't necessarily be as good against this Ravens team that has been really good against the run, even if they can't stop anybody that's trying to throw the ball on them. And these aren't just total metrics, right? Like if you look at it, no team has had more pass attempts against them this year than the Ravens. Partially that's because they're always winning games. So the raw stats and like total passing yardage is obviously going to be near the bottom of the league because they're facing the most dropbacks. But you look at any rate stat, it's the exact same situation. This is not just a product of volume. They've been objectively bad. So that's another thing just to consider here is that the Steelers' ability to run the ball, I do think is going to be challenged. So those 50-50 balls become almost even more important. Like you need to lean into the volatility because you're not going to have something to necessarily rely on down to down. The one thing that I do think showed up against the Bengals last week that I wonder, is this going to change? Are they going to click into something a little bit different? Is the pass rush versus Cincinnati looked a lot better than it has for a good majority of this season? The question becomes, is that because Cody Ford was playing left tackle for the Bengals and because Justin Madubuike or Nnamdi Madubuike can just eat against those interior guys? Or are we going to see them take this to a slightly different place in the back half of the season? I'm more willing to lean on number one than number two
Yeah.
here, but I'm at least still curious to watch it against the Steelers team that while the offensive line has been better than we've expected, they've been able to overcome injuries. Right tackle is still a problem. You can get them every once in a while, especially that right side.
That's a good point. Like, even regardless of whatever you believe about the Ravens pass rush, this is kind of a gettable offensive line, regardless. I think, especially at the tackle spots. I actually think their interior is pretty well put together.
I think
But
Mason
maybe
McCormick is still a rookie fourth round pick. I think you can still get him every so often.
And especially with these interior players, right? Like
Yes.
on Baltimore, they are one of the best duos, and they've got some depth there. So I think that's certainly going to be a problem.
It's not even an indictment of Mason
But
McCormick. He's a
it's really
rookie
not.
fourth round pick who came from
Yes.
a small school. Like it's okay for him not to be a perfect player at this point in his career.
Exactly. So I don't know. I still though when I look at this Ravens pass rush, I think when I was watching that Bengals game, I was like, this Bengals offensive line is just getting Burrow killed. And like I didn't come away from it being like, this might be the thing that is going to fix the Ravens defense. I just thought, wow, they lucked into Cody Ford having to play left tackle today.
Yeah, that's kind of where I went to. A couple injury concerns, couple injury considerations on that side of the ball. Looks like Kyle Hamilton is going to play. He practiced today. And why I think that's really important in this game specifically, if you look at something that teams have tried to do against the Steelers this year, the Colts game stands out to me. The Colts did it a ton. They sent a lot of like nickel perimeter pressures on early downs. A couple of things that I think are important with that. One, they've just had trouble dealing with them. The quarterbacks haven't recognized them. I think that in protection, they've had trouble picking that stuff up. And two, where that sort of approach matters, especially on early downs. A team that uses a lot of play action and you know they're going to use a lot of play action, that's how you can short circuit that sort of offense. And that's exactly who the Steelers want to be. If you know for the most part, if it's first down, there is a 75% chance you're either getting a play action pass or a run, you can send some of those nickel pressures. And against a 12-13 personnel team, I expect them to be in looks where Kyle Hamilton is in the box in a good chunk of this game. So him being here and them being able to deploy him on some of those let's fuck shit up approaches on early downs, I do think that's a huge consideration coming into this.
I think it absolutely is. I mean, especially too for as much as like Arthur Smith still loves to do a lot of his outside zone stuff, and
Yeah.
if you're gonna be running that at the nickel, it helps when you got the guy who is built like a pterodactyl and isn't afraid to get his nose dirty. Fighting some of those tight ends and tackles and stuff. So yeah, I think Hamilton being in this game would go a really really long way because I think for as much as I think some of the depth behind Hamilton is not that bad, they don't do a lot of the same things against the run that he can do, and so I think it would be
I just think
probably
about
the
the
biggest
body
thing in this
types.
game.
Like Arthur
Yeah, the body
Millette
type.
is a very different
Yeah.
guy, or even Ardarius Washington is very
Ardarius
different.
Washington
He's
might be
built.
the most different from Hamilton, whereas like Ardarius Washington is like 5'8" on a good day, short arms, whereas Hamilton is like the biggest and tallest safety nickel type in the league.
On the other side of the ball, the Steelers defense obviously has a good day last week being able to slow down Jaden Daniels. I don't know if we really talked a good amount about what that matchup looked like and what their game plan looked like. We're talking about an NFL Network tonight, so I was looking up some of the numbers. The Steelers played like 70% man in that game. They played like 85% man on early downs. Like they were just challenging that Washington team in a way that you don't really challenge an NFL team. It was just a very much a curveball of a game plan. And they brought a lot of pressure. They were bringing 5 consistently. And I think that was to kind of create a wall when they were coming after Jaden Daniels that would prevent him from scrambling. And they did. He had 0 rush scrambles the entire game. I don't know how much that specific game plan is applicable to what this Ravens team is because they really loaded the box against Washington. If you load the box against this Ravens team, it's over. Like it's
Yeah.
absolutely over with the way the Lamar is playing. So what do you think, even if they're going to try to do something different, this Steelers defense can look like against this version of the Ravens offense?
I don't think the bring 5 and play man coverage deal is going to do a whole lot in this game. Like I think it. I think some people would maybe look at Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson and be like, oh, well, athletically they can do a lot of the same things, and so if that worked against Jaden Daniels, then maybe it should work against Lamar Jackson. But Lamar Jackson is truly playing at an ascended level right now against the blitz specifically, and specifically against man coverage. So like that is not going to be the way to beat him. I think the way that you're going to have to beat Lamar Jackson, and this is kind of just true of beating any elite quarterback, is you just have to find a way to get home with 4. And I think the Steelers can do that, right? Like their interior, those guys can get pushed. Benson can get pushed. Hayward is still doing it at this level. Like Watt is obviously having a really good year. So like they have guys who can do it. It's just a matter of can you hold up in coverage while you wait for those guys to get home? Because also too, for as good as the Ravens offensive line is, and I think they're certainly better than I thought coming into the season.
The pressure rates and everything are so much.
I
They're
know
really,
they
really
are,
good
but
this year.
I think what I come down to is that some of their pressure numbers are like a self-fulfilling prophecy from Lamar
In what way?
Jackson. In that, like, Lamar playing at the level that he's playing at, being faster than he's been in 2 or 3 years, I just don't think teams are as comfortable, like, letting all of their defensive linemen pin their ears back and just get after him. I think defenses are playing a little bit slower trying to contain him, and so some of the pass rush stuff is like, they're just getting away with stuff because they just don't wanna go too crazy about Lamar Jackson.
I like that, and I actually do think you can feel that, and that's just one of the other kind of subtle impacts that a guy like Lamar has on the game that is very hard to quantify, and it's
Right.
very hard to understand, like, how he's shaping what's in front of him, but I think that's right. The difference is, I think the Steelers team, because they've played against him so often, it's
That's a
just a
good point.
different sort of approach, and I think a different level of just familiarity with how you have to approach him. Alex Highsmith being out is a big deal in this game, though, because I do think that with that front fully healthy, the same way they did against Washington last week, they can really dictate and control games. You remove him from the equation, and I think that becomes much more difficult.
That's a good point because if they're fully comfortable leaving Stanley on an island with whoever, I mean, truthfully, for as good as Highsmith is, they could have been doing that anyway, and then send all of your help to the other side, help Rosengarten on Watt, then like, yeah, you're probably going to be in a really good spot in this game.
That's another thing. We've alluded to this. I think it's worth mentioning. The last thing we'll say here is that Ronnie Stanley playing like Ronnie Stanley has been a huge reason that this Ravens offense has been able to accomplish what they have been and why they feel so potent. Because last year, I think a lot of people, Ravens fans specifically, who were watching this team every week. They were like, you guys are overrating what the offensive line is. It's not that good of a group, especially in pass protection. Part of that argument was that Ronnie Stanley looked like a diminished version of himself still. He looks pretty damn good this year. Like he is a objectively like very good left tackle, upper echelon sort of left tackle with the way he's playing. And I do think that that has really contributed to just this Ravens team being an absolute supernova on that side of the ball. The last thing I wanted to ask you, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but I was just thinking about it because it does feel like this Steelers team is a different sort of beast than what we've dealt with over the last couple of years. Realistically, what do you think the Steelers team is like capable of achieving this year?
They could maybe steal a wild card game depending on their draw, but I just even for their record and even if they win this game and end up 8-2, which is going to sound crazy to say, I just don't really see them being more than a wild card team. mostly because of the quarterback play and some of the limitations with the offense.
Just how inconsistent it can feel. The
Yeah,
fact that the offense
exactly.
has to be as volatile as it is in a way that's benefited them so far, being that sort of offense when you start to play against the best teams in the league. I understand that. But still, even like that statement and even that framing where like, oh yeah, they can win a wild card game, that still feels like we're talking about a different sort of ceiling for the Steelers than we have over the last couple years.
They've struggled to get into the wild card, the past few
It's
years.
true.
So for that,
It's
if they
true.
could get there and I feel decent that they could take a game off, yeah, we're in the right direction.
Let's start with the Seahawks at the 49ers. Obviously, a rematch of one we got earlier this year. Pretty good Thursday night game. One thing you're looking for, the number one thing you're looking for as the Seahawks and 49ers rematch kicks off.
The next step of the Christian McCaffrey, bringing him back into the fold. That's all that matters to me for not this game, for the rest of the entire 49ers season, because they've been a pretty good football team, right? Like, I know the record is not what they want it to be, but they've done a lot of what they want to do on offense. They've been efficient. I think the defense is playing at a pretty high level. Their ceiling as a football team is purely dependent on, can we get Christian McCaffrey back to the player that he was a year ago? So if they can take any step towards that this week, I'd feel great. And that's what I want to see.
What signs did you get last week, one way or the other, about how that might go?
I thought last week was kind of about just like getting him live game reps again. I think their game plan was not as versatile and as interesting as it had been in, like last year when it was with Christian McCaffrey,
Mhm.
especially in the run game. Like, I think we've lauded Kyle Shanahan's ability to, he's done more gap stuff and a lot more pulling, more power, all this stuff. Last week it was a lot of just, their outside zone stuff. And that's fine. Like, they're obviously still really good at it. It's just I think
You're
they were
also playing against a funky defense,
that's
right?
true.
Like,
That's a good
outside
point.
zone gives you more answers to a team that's gonna blitz a lot. It's one of those runs you can essentially run into anything. So I think that might have been part of it. Maybe as much about easing McCaffrey back in, the opponent probably played a little bit into that too.
That actually is a really good point. I hadn't even considered that, but yeah, that is a good point where you have a defense that's going to throw all this stuff. You don't know necessarily where Buda Baker is rotating before the snap. Like,
That was the Bucks, not the
oh yeah,
Cardinals.
so it was the Bucks. Yeah, never mind.
Whatever, Antoine Winfield.
Yeah, yeah, Antoine Winfield. I think I was just thinking about what Buda Baker has done to them before. Um, but yeah, so I know, and then in the passing game, I think the biggest thing I wanted from McCaffrey was to fix the red zone problems because they're still maybe the worst. Like, relative to how good they are as an offense between the 20s, they are probably the worst offense in the red zone. Like, they're not actually, but just relative to what they should be, they
Yeah,
feel like
yeah,
the
that's a
worst.
good point. Yes,
Right, like
they're not
relative
dead
to what I know
last, but
you can
relative
be.
to expectations,
Yes.
yes.
And so just them fixing that, I think, could go a really long way because they didn't get him that involved there. So if they could just do that a little bit this week, that'd be great.
It was nice to see him get some of those reps in the passing game where they're featuring him, right? I mean, there was one play where he's lined up as the number one receiver on the left side. I believe Juszczyk was in the backfield. He runs like a little short post in breaker. They hit him on it. And then obviously that wheel out of the backfield for the huge chunk gain in the second half. So the flashes are there, right? Like the glimpses of what this could potentially be when he gets fully reintroduced. I do think we saw some of them. I just think that being able to lean on the run game as a consistency thing within this offense. They have not been able to do that this year. This is like a below average rushing success rate team. They were number one in the league last year. And I think that's part of the reason, on top of all the man coverage that they've seen and the play style that's inspired from Purdy, why this whole thing feels a little bit more uneven and a little bit more scattershot, even if the underlying numbers are still very good for this offense. The number one thing for me, we don't spend a ton of time on this. I just think that when after what we saw last week against the Bucks and after what we saw the last time the Seahawks defense played, I want to see what the creeper simulated pressure plan from Seattle looks like against the Niners, because the Niners had some trouble with that last week against the Bucks. They were actually really good when the Bucks brought big blitzes. I'm pretty sure Purdy was like 5 for 5 when they brought 6 or more. And so it's not necessarily pressures. It's when they're bringing an unconventional four that's trying to test your rules. That was the Trio and Shainka sack that ended up becoming big and knocking them out and forcing them to kick a field goal. So teams have been doing that to them or trying to do that to them. And now that's how Seattle wants to play. Because when Seattle got Ernest Jones, we know that one of his best traits is what he can do as a blitzer. And he had I think a half dozen or more pass rush snaps in that Rams game, but it wasn't blitzes. That's not what Mike Macdonald wants to do. They're trying to bring four. They're trying to drop guys off the line of scrimmage. So for the second straight week, I think that there's going to be a team testing the Niners pass protection rules, even if they're not going to be blitzing a ton. And I'm curious what that's going to look like.
That's a really good point because with Purdy, it's not about he's scared to throw the ball under pressure, or he's not willing to rip some throws. He will certainly do it. It's almost like
He's
Jared
very good
Goff.
at it.
It's almost like Jared Goff, where like Goff will hang in there and he'll make the throw. It's a matter of, can you drop someone weird into the window that he thinks that he has? And I think that
You
this
get a
is
free
certainly
runner here or there,
yes.
just and their pass protection rules. I mean, it's a Shanahan team. You kind of understand what the rules are going to be, and we've seen really creative defenses be able to get after some of the teams in that tree this year. When you understand, all right, if I pull this lever, I know exactly what's going to happen.
Mike McDonald did it last year, and obviously that
Yeah.
was a much more talented Ravens team. But he knows what the levers you need to pull against specifically the San Francisco 49ers and Brock Purdy.
I want to have a Niners defense discussion next week because we haven't really talked about that group at all. You alluded to the fact that they're playing a little bit better than we would have expected. A lot of the young secondary pieces on that team, I think, have played well for them. They're playing the Packers next week. I would assume, based on what happens this week, maybe we'll have to reevaluate. There's a good chance that that's going to inch into game of the week treatment where we'll talk about both sides of the ball. But the Niners defense is just a unit we haven't really discussed, and I think they probably deserve a little bit more attention. Let's get to our next one. The Falcons at Broncos. I don't think there's anything like super crazy or unique about this. The one thing I'm watching is the fact that the Falcons offense is a very good unit. The Broncos defense is a very good unit. This is one of the better unit on unit matchups this week and probably that we'll see all year.
Yeah, I mean, these are two like top 6, 7 units on their side of the ball. I mean, Broncos, you can probably make a case that they're even higher than that.
Yeah.
Like these are two like just absolute powerhouse units. And I know that that sounds weird again after the Falcons lost to the Saints last week. You go back and watch the Saints film, which I actually or the Falcons film, like which I did very shortly before recording this. They were really, really good down to down, like on a down to down
They're moving
basis.
the ball really consistently.
Yes, they were really good up until it came time to kick a field goal or get it over the end zone when they were inside the 10. Like other than that, they were a fantastic offense. And I just have to imagine they won't be as bad in those areas every single week. And so I think this is just an absolute powerhouse fight. I'm very excited to watch this one.
My favorite specific thing about this matchup is that the Falcons do as good a job as anybody in my mind this year of creating separation via design when they know they're going to be getting man coverage. When you look at what the Falcons are able to do on third down or their approach on third down, they run trip sets, according to Next Gen, on like 73.5% of their third downs. It's a lot of bunches. And that rate is the second highest in the entire NFL. We know the Broncos want to play a ton of man coverage. So how the Falcons play with that, what sort of motions we're going to see, what sort of alignments we're going to see, what sort of rub routes we're going to see. That to me is the most important part of this matchup, especially in some of those high leverage situations.
Dude, you know what the Falcons do all the time that is particularly good for that and for beating man coverage is they'll have like two wide receivers kind of in an offset stack to one side. They'll motion somebody from the other side and bring them like close to the stack into the bunch, and he'll split in between the two offset receivers.
It's a
And it's
Rams
like,
thing.
that's just annoying, dude. Like, quit doing that. Like, it's just so goddamn annoying they do stuff like that. But they do a really good job with it. And when you have guys who are either as slippery as Darnell Mooney or just like in some of those traffic scenarios as like bully ball as Drake London can be, they're just really, really good at getting the separation that you need in those areas. So against the Broncos team that again, is going to run a lot of man, I'm very excited to watch it. The other part of this in the passing game that I'm very excited to watch could be a huge Bijan Robinson game out of the backfield as a
Ooh,
pass catcher.
interesting.
Because so Denver, I looked this up. Denver has allowed the third most targets to running backs this year. It's 71 targets. You know who has the fourth most targets among running backs this year? Bijan Robinson. Kirk really loves him out of the backfield, and it's not a lot of screens. It's like checkdowns and flats and all that stuff. So I think it could be a big game for him.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if Denver blitzes a lot, are we going to have situations where they're keeping him
That's a
in
good
to
point.
pass protect and how they're going to be able to manipulate that. So that's something that's worth watching. The other
I will
part,
say though, that's actually still good for Atlanta. Bijan Robinson's a very good pass blocker.
yes, he absolutely is. But this Broncos team, we know they like to bring a lot of heat, and we know that
Mm.
they're going to test you in that way. The run game part of this also is worth paying attention to. We've talked so much about how the Falcons running game has been incredibly consistent. It's been an engine of their offense. This Broncos team is a fucking pain in the ass to deal with. I mean, they are going to give your run game trouble. And then up front, the individual matchups, if the Broncos, and this is what the Broncos plan has been all year. Let's create some negatives on the ground on early downs. Let's force teams into third and obvious pass. And then we're going to let our guys let loose because we have the horses to make life hard on you in those situations. And last week, we saw Nick Bonito absolutely toasting the left tackle for the Chiefs. A little bit of a different thing with Jake Matthews, but you have Jonathan Cooper on the other side, and Caleb McGarry. You talk about why the down to down consistency didn't really matter as much for the Falcons last
Oh
week
God.
is because we had some really rough moments from the right tackle. And Jonathan Cooper, who just got a contract extension, has been like a nice surprise the way he's played for Denver this year. That matchup specifically, I think, has a chance to favor the Broncos and maybe slightly tilt things in their favor.
I think that's a good point. If they can get the Falcons in just 2 or 3 more of those obvious pass situations than they want, could be Denver's game.
The last thing I wanted to say about the Broncos, and this really, I alluded to it earlier when we were talking about the Chiefs pass rush. I don't think I really realized how well the Broncos pass protection unit is playing this year. So if you look at some of the places where there are metrics for these things, and I know those are imperfect, but I do think they lead you to the right direction. This season, the Denver Broncos offensive line has been responsible for 60% of the team's pressures allowed. No other team in the NFL is below 72%, and that's the Chiefs. The gap between the Broncos at 32 and the Chiefs at 31 is the same as the gap between Mahomes at 27, or excuse me, the gap between the Broncos at 28, there are 28 qualified quarterbacks, and the Chiefs at 27 is larger than the gap between the Chiefs at 27 and Justin Herbert at 8. That's what we're talking about here. That's how much of an outlier the Broncos pass protection unit has been this year. When you watch them, that's not surprising. They have been really, really good all the way across the board. And I do think that has been a huge reason why we've been able to see Bo Nix operate the way that he has, because you can make a serious argument that the Broncos have been the best pass protection team in the NFL so far this season.
I think you can, and I think some people when we want to look at offensive line and go, where's the big ticket left tackle? Where's the all pro guard? Where's this
We make it
center
about
that
personnel when it shouldn't be about personnel.
right? Like so much of offensive line stuff is like, what is the ecosystem of like how the offense is put together? How is the scheme helping these guys? How is the run game helping your pass blocking scenarios? And Sean Payton, man, he's done this for a long time, and he's put together some really good run games and pass protection units before. And I think he's certainly doing it right now. And I think all of these guys are kind of playing to their highest level. And you get one or two, maybe blips where somebody just blows something every now and then. But like when these offensive linemen get hands on guys, and they're usually pretty good at that, they really don't lose. And I think it's really impressive the way that they're playing right now.
Zach Strief is their offensive line coach, who obviously played for Sean Payton for
That's
however
a
many
good point.
years. So somebody very fluent in the way that Sean Payton wants to address this stuff. And we had some questions coming into the season, like what is Sean Payton actually in 2024? Like how much is Sean Payton going to lift an offense, a young quarterback, a system in this at this era, at this stage of his career? And I think that it may not be as sexy as some of the other offensive systems where it's like, oh, look at that motion, like what you were talking about with the Falcons. That's not happening as much, but I think the bones of what they're trying to accomplish is very good, very consistent, and just very apt to set a young quarterback up for success. Even if the weapons aren't there, the underlying aspects and foundation of the offense is really rock solid and steady.
Yes, the foundation's good. They don't make mistakes. Guys are playing hard. Sometimes it's as simple as that.
Last game we wanted to hit here, the Bengals at the Chargers, another really good matchup. And the Bengals offense against the Chargers defense, I mean, that is a marquee sort of clash here. What is the number one thing you're looking for here between Joe Burrow and Jesse Minter's unit on Sunday?
I mean, to me, it's just explosive plays. That's it. That's the single thing. Because, truthfully for me, I look at this Chargers defense and I look at this Bengals offense. I think the Chargers defense will do a decent enough job, like not letting the Bengals just grind them, do the thousand paper cuts thing to death. I think they'll do an okay job there. It'll at least be a stalemate where, Bengals aren't just marching up the field every single drive. But this Chargers defense has not allowed explosive passes this year. They've only given up 32, which is the fifth lowest in the NFL. And the Bengals, on like a per rate, don't have like the most, the highest explosive pass rate. But part of that is they just do so much empty, so much quick gun stuff, so many screens, yada yada. I think we know when they want to get explosive passing plays, they can get them. It's a matter of, is it going to be one or is it going to be four? Like to me, that's the game.
How do you feel like T. Higgins coming back impacts what the Bengals want to do and impacts this game specifically?
I would say so. Obviously, Chase lifts your floor or lifts your ceiling in terms of like explosive play potential, right? Like he is just anytime he touches the ball, it could be 50 yards. And then Burrow, I think, just by nature of how he plays the game, how he's matured, you kind of always have a floor in the passing game. Like your quick game's always going to be good. You can get into empty. You can do this simple, short underneath stuff. Higgins is kind of like their mid-range guy. Like, you need to throw a 12-yard dig route. You
Oh
need
yeah,
to throw
I
a
like that.
like a 14-yard curl route or something on the sideline where it's like, I just need my guy to win one-on-one. He's like their mid-range shot. And I think for them to get that back in the offense, it's going to unlock. They're just going to have more options now, which I think is really huge for them.
It's funny because Mike Gesicki was that when Higgins was out.
It's not the same.
Higgins gives you a slightly different gear than Mike Gesicki does in those moments. A couple injury things to keep in mind. Obviously, Higgins back practicing. It sounds like he's going to play. Orlando Brown has not been practicing, but was at their walkthrough. And I think Zach Taylor essentially said, guys that are at the walkthrough, we anticipate that they might play in the game. Like if you're going to play, you have to be at the walkthrough. So I think there's a chance he could play in this game. And that's important because we've talked about it. Cody Ford in there at left tackle. This is a team that's banged up along the offensive line. I've already lost Trent Brown this year. So Amarius Mims, who was their swing tackle, starting on the right side, they've dug into the depth, and you saw it show up against the Ravens. So getting Orlando Brown back is big. Khalil Mack also not practicing. He played 4 snaps last week, dealing with a groin injury. If he can't play, and they're still bringing Joey Bosa along kind of slowly, then some of the issues we saw for this Bengals offense protection-wise against the Ravens last week matter a little bit less against the Chargers. But I will say, I think that even at full strength, this Bengals offensive line is outmatched on the interior against the Tarts and the Puna Forwards and the Ogbonias in ways that we probably wouldn't have talked about last year with this Chargers team.
I definitely agree with that. Like they've just got juice up there in a way that they didn't before. And even, Tuli Pelotu, who is typically their third edge guy, you don't want him as your number one, but like in an emergency situation like this, not the worst guy to have to be your number one pass rusher, especially if the interior is going to be as good as it has been.
Let's get to the things that might only be interesting to us this week. We do this pretty much every single week on the previous show. Just one little nugget about the week that might not be the biggest headline grabbing thing, but we find interesting. What's yours for week 11?
The Los Angeles Rams play the New England Patriots. To me, these are just the quarterbacks I want to watch. We have Matthew
You're a parody of
Stafford.
yourself at this
I
point.
know, I am. But we have Matthew Stafford versus the guy who I hope is some offshoot of Matthew Stafford playing one-on-one. And I think regardless of, I don't know what the ratio is going to be, but we're going to get 5 holy shit throws between the two of these guys in this game. And I can't wait to see him.
I've been so impressed by what Drake May has done with his legs this season
Oh,
so
that's a
far.
great point too. Yeah.
If you look at all, and that's the thing when you're talking about comparing Matthew Stafford and Drake May, the high level arm talent, what he's willing to do, throws down the field. I mean, if that stuff comes and he's in the Matthew Stafford category, great. But he's able to provide stuff on the ground and break in case of emergency plays that Matthew Stafford never could even dream of. If you look at some of like the value created on scramble stats over the last like 4 or 5 weeks, Drake May is at the top of the NFL. It's not Jaden Daniels. It's not Lamar Jackson. It's not Jalen Hurts, who I think is doing his best work as a scrambler that he's ever done in his career. It is Drake May at the top of all of these lists. And that's why I think that almost Josh Allen and what he's
Yeah.
able to do in effect in offense is as apt of a comparison as what Matthew Stafford is. And that's a really encouraging place to be a few games into his career if you're Drake May and if you're a Patriots fan.
Yeah, there have already been multiple games this year where he's got like 65 rushing yards and the next guy on the team has like 19.
Curious to see what the Rams do in this game. I don't think we necessarily wrote them off after the Monday night game, but it's been 2 straight games where the offense has looked uneven, a little sloppy. I'm curious now that we've had another full week of practice, hopefully, with those offensive linemen that they brought back with Avila, with Jonah Jackson. Do we see them kind of take it to a different place against a Patriots defense that, while capable of destroying the Bears, has had its issue against better offenses this year? Speaking of that Monday night game, this only might be interesting to me. We talked about this a little bit on the midweek show. Can the Dolphins really climb back into this? Like, are the Dolphins actually in a position to make this interesting down the stretch? Okay. Let's say the Broncos lose this week, okay, to the Falcons, which they absolutely might. Now we're in a place where if the Dolphins win this week against the Raiders and they're 4-6, things start to get a little bit interesting. They play the Raiders, the Patriots, the Packers, and the Jets in their next 4. So if we assume the favorites win those games, they will be 6-7 at the end of that run. And then their final 4 games, Texans, Niners, Browns, Jets. So if they go 2-1 against the Packers, Texans, and Niners, and they win all the rest, which I know is not a guarantee, right? Like those are still 3 quality teams. they'd be 10-7. So if they get a couple breaks, and listen, they've won a couple games or almost won a couple games we didn't expect them to. They almost beat the Cardinals a couple weeks ago. And I think as we reframe that game, thinking about what the Cardinals are right now, that performance is more impressive in hindsight. They beat the Rams last week. The offense is still capable of being a really good, consistent down to down unit. We saw Tua create a little bit in that game in ways we haven't seen before. The defense is playing pretty darn well right now, and I think is actually a better unit than people are probably recognizing right now. So it is a slim, narrow path to getting there, but I'm not willing to completely shut the door in a way I probably was like 3 or 4 days ago.
That's the thing. I think when this was posed earlier in the week, I was like, dude, there's no way. They're 3-6,
That was
too
my
far
response.
behind
I
it.
was like, "Fuck off,
Yeah,
Barwell.
I
There's
was
no
like,
chance that they're gonna come back and do this."
yeah, like there's no way. But then you know what? If the Broncos lose, I don't think the Bengals are guaranteed to win this week by any stretch. Like they could lose, and that would certainly help Miami. Like, and I've said before, I don't think it's over for Miami because they're not a good football team. It's over because they're at 3-6, and I thought that they were
Yeah.
just going to be so far behind the eight ball. But they're really a decent team on both sides of the ball, and so I'm at least willing to like leave the door a centimeter open for them and just see what happens.
The last thing I'll say about this, even if they don't actually get there, I think that finishing the season strong, being able to talk yourself into, okay, this really was a Tua missed a chunk of the year. When we have our quarterback and when we're marginally healthy, this team is still very capable and still one of the better teams in the AFC. Maybe not in the top tier, but a playoff caliber team, a team that's going to finish in a 10 win sort of bracket. And if that's going to be the case, if that's how we're going to feel about them by the end of the season, I think you can easily justify bringing this staff back and seeing, all right, with a couple of the aging pieces that we have, Teron Armstead's playing well this year. You still have Tyreek Hill. You still have Jalen Ramsey. They're getting into their 30s now. What can the 2025 Dolphins look like? Can we take one more shot at this thing? And I think that if you end the season strong and you're pushing to get a wild card spot, it's a lot easier to talk yourself into that heading into 2025.
That's a good point. And next year it would be like year two of Anthony Weaver. Like it just, I can see it. I'll leave it open. I'm more open to it than I was 4 days ago. Yeah.
All right, it's time for Take Tribunal, where one of us just tries on a take that we've been thinking about, and the other person can say yay or nay. I was thinking about this when I was watching the Monday night game, and I was reading just people on the internet talking about Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels and just our expectations for what those situations were going to look like and what they actually looked like. And I think there were some people who were confused about the discussion around these rookie quarterbacks and what we were talking about with them coming into the season. I think this season has been a good reminder of how much that ecosystem and coaching matter, and they were not over indexing it. Because if you look at the Caleb Williams situation coming into the year, I think the reason so many people thought it was great is that you look at the receivers on paper and say, oh, this is the best situation number one pick has ever been in. But I don't think that's the way you should talk about situation. The right offensive system, the right ecosystem, the right environment, however you want to put it, to me acts as a multiplier for that talent that you have on paper. And I think the factor of improvement or adverse effect that the right or wrong ecosystem that can provide is way, way bigger than people like to admit or understand. And I think that we've seen that start to unfold here, or we've seen that unfold here over the first 2 months of the season. We can get into some of the specifics why, but that's like generally at the core where I think some of this is a little bit off.
I really like that. And I think there are so many different angles that you can kind of approach this from. One is just that when we're doing preseason stuff, we're kind of guessing, right? Like we're
That's exactly
guessing what
right.
this stuff is going to look like, and we don't know until like week 5 or 6, like what this stuff is solidified to actually look like. And I think some of those, obviously the Bear situation versus Washington are kind of two good examples. And I think a lot of what happens is that if we end up wrong one way or the other, and I think certainly like in the Bears case where we kind of probably over indexed how good the top talent names of the receivers are versus literally everything else over there. I think sometimes we just do it, all we do is say the quarterback is either responsible for this not looking as good as I wanted it to be, or the quarterback is responsible for all of why looks better than I thought it would be, which like Washington is kind of a great example. It definitely looks a lot better than I thought it would be. And it's easy to just be like, wow, Jaden Daniels is the greatest rookie I've ever seen. And he is playing really well. But man, like they're getting more out of Luke McCaffrey than I thought they were going to. Like they signed Noah Brown and he's kind of a useful player somehow. They're getting way more out of I thought this would be the worst offensive line in football, by the way. And they're just like definitively a good unit because of some of what you said before about Cliff Kingsbury kind of protecting them and some of their development plans for guys like Brandon Coleman, Sam Cosmi taking a step that like I knew he was good. I didn't know he would be the best guard in football for a year. Like just all that stuff, you just don't know until 6 weeks into the season. And I think we have to reframe how we think about what situations these quarterbacks are actually playing in when it gets down to it.
When you get the information, it's important to recalibrate.
Yes,
And
yes.
we know what the multiplier is going to look like when the coaches are established and the situations are consistent. We know what the positive multiplier is going to be from Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, Ben Johnson. But when we have guys that are new play callers walking into situations, we don't know how to account for whether the multiplier is going to be a positive or a negative. For example, right? Like in those supporting cast rankings, like you mentioned, I had Washington 16th among the teams in the NFC. I had them dead last. I had the Bears 10th. And those rankings were more about the talent on the roster than they were about the coaches because the coaches were an unknown. But you watch the season, Washington absolutely isn't the worst situation in the league. I'd argue that it's gone from the bottom of the league to like the top half of the league pretty definitively. And if you want an objective measure of that, coming into the year, Brandon Thorne, who does great work on offensive lines, he had Washington dead last in his offensive line rankings. Dead last. Okay, 32nd in the league. PFF coming into this season or into this week has them 8th in their offensive line rankings. So, but even if you don't trust those sources, right? And you that maybe there's something a little bit off there. I do think you're getting a general sense about how our perceived perception of those groups have changed. And when I say multiplier, that's what I'm talking about here. That's the multiplier thing that we're talking about. The right coaching staff, the right ecosystem can take an average line on paper and make them good, and it can take an average line on paper and make them bad. That's how much of a pull you can have between those two things. And I think offensive lines and protection is the easiest thing to crank up because it's so much about cohesion and plan. But I also think this applies to the pass catchers, right? You can have a multiplier on the pass catchers. If you're using DJ Moore as Tyler Lockett, he is no longer DJ Moore. So the right coaching staff, the right ecosystem, the right support system makes talent matter less. And it can do that one of two ways. It can make the talent matter less in a good way, or it can make the talent matter less in a bad way. And I think us recognizing that and recalibrating how we understand those situations as we experience it, that's really, really important when you try to understand how much of this is on the quarterback and how much of this is on what's going on around him. I don't think you can watch Caleb Williams right now and not be worried. I think if you're not worried, you're probably lying to yourself at least a little bit. But when we think about he was in such a good situation, it's just important, I think, to reevaluate what that actually means as we get into the year and we understand what sort of multiplier, positive or negative, we're talking about with the ecosystem, coaching staff, all of that. That's my rant. I've been thinking a lot about this and how to properly articulate it, but that's the place where I finally ended up landing.
I think it's a spot on take. And you know what? I think a lot of people are gonna make this almost purely about Caleb versus Jaden Daniels, but like even go look at Bo Nix. Like I think a
That's
lot of
what we
people
just talked about with
probably
the pass protection.
right, exactly. It's all the pass protection. And like the last point I'll make on that, they played with a backup center for a handful of games this year. Did anybody notice? Would people have known that they played with a backup center this year? No, because the pass protection was still so put together. Everyone knew what they needed to. The run game was still helping them get into good pass protection stuff. And then truthfully, I think you've seen with Sean Payton, the offense is different over the past month or so than it was in the first month. They're doing more RPOs. They're doing more where they're just getting easy crossing routes for Knicks to throw. They're doing more like, hey man, throw a go ball to Courtland Sutton every now and then. Like it's just they've locked into what he's good at. Whereas you watch a team like the Bears and it just doesn't feel like they know what they think Caleb is good at even.
And I think when we're talking about situation for young quarterbacks, the offensive line and the protection is the most important thing to set the
Mhm.
floor of what your offense looks like. And I think some people will look at that and say, well, then why did Ryan Poles go out and get all these receivers? But that's also part of the problem here. If you look at the Bears offensive line on paper coming into the year, I think the talent level that they were bringing into this season cleared the bar of what you need from your offensive line. The problem is if you get the negative 1.7 multiplier on that level of talent compared to the positive 1.7, you go from being the 20th best offense in the league to the 29th best offensive line in the league, and it no longer feels tenable. So there's just so much at play here, and there's so many complicating factors, and there's so much context that there's almost no way to encapsulate it in like one 10-minute conversation. But I just think we really need to consider all of the layers that go into this and not so simply say, well, he was in the best situation ever. Why is it a bad situation now? Because it actually can erode in ways that we probably don't always recognize.
We can just be wrong sometimes. And buddy, in this line of work, we are wrong a lot.
It's not even just wrong, but it's like you said, it's unknowns.
Right,
It's
yes, yeah.
so hard to know what these situations are going to look like, especially with new play callers. Even if guys have done it before, it's all slightly different. Your personnel is different. The guys you're working with are different. Can the quarterback paper it over a little bit less than the previous quarterback you had? Cliff has been a play caller in the NFL before. He's never been a coordinator. He's never been somebody whose entire purview is the offense the way that it is now. You can get better as an offensive coordinator. There are just so many different things to take into account. And I think that that's why the discussion around quarterbacks, expectations, what we're doing, how much is on them, just become incredibly knotty and complicated. All right, before we get out of here, it's time for what do you want to know? We do this every week. One thing you want to know by the end of the week 11 slate. Lay it on me.
Anthony Richardson, can he be normal perhaps? Like did these last 2 weeks where he's on the bench, did they make him a little bit more normal? That's all I want to know. And this is not only a gettable Jets defense. This Jets defense, since they fired Robert Saleh, has the worst EPA per play in the league.
It's crazy.
Go get after him, young man. Like go get it.
When we were talking about this before and just discussing maybe some of the potential reasons they put him on the bench, it really was, in the way that I understood it, just to take a breath. Can he just take a small break where it's like to get a better sense of like what the expectations on him are? And the word swimming or drowning, that's the term we keep coming back to. It felt like he was drowning a little bit. Can this short break get him to a place where it all feels a little bit more achievable, where it feels like he's not just trying to keep his head above water? And I will be very, very interested to see what the answer to that is. And over the next couple of weeks, I do want at some point have a conversation about what you think the offense is doing this year and whether or not you think Shane Steichen and this group is actually setting their quarterbacks up for success, because that was a staff and a system that I think we were all pretty excited about coming into the year. And I don't think I have a ton of fully formed thoughts about it yet because it's been so hard to gauge because of the quarterback play. But I do think at some point it's going to be worth talking about that and seeing how much we can separate those two things. Speaking of separating the quarterback play from the system, I don't need to spend a lot of time on this. What do I want to know is, after changing the offensive play caller, can the next 8 weeks for the Bears be at a level that is not actively detrimental to the development of your quarterback, where you are harming him every single time he's taking a snap and is in there? Can Thomas Brown do that? That's it. I'm spending no more time talking about it than that. That is my question heading into this week.
That's all it's got to be. Go ask Caleb, hey, what are the 2 or 3 things you really like doing? All right, let's get good at them for the next 2 months and get to the end of the season.
All right, that's all we got for today. You got any fun plans this weekend? What do you got on tap this weekend?
I think the only thing I'm really going to be doing is the Rainbow Six. Their major is at the end of the season. It's an FPS shooter game. So their major tournament ends this weekend. So very excited to watch that.
Attaboy. That's great. We have our Friendsgiving on Saturday, so I have to figure out how I'm going to smoke a turkey and be able to do all that stuff and making food for a bunch of people. So it's a fun time of year. When we get into like late November or so and get holidays and just chance to wear like big sweaters and eat a lot of great food is something I very much embrace. So looking forward to that and looking forward to a great weekend of football. We talked about 5 games today for a reason. There's a bunch of awesome stuff on the week 11 slate. We'll be back talking about that on Sunday night into Monday. Until then, sincerely appreciate you guys listening. We'll talk to you very soon.